Shadows whispered secrets in the moonlit garden, where a single petal fell like a silent scream. But what if that petal held the key to a murder most foul? Welcome to Miss Marple in the Whispering Garden, a tale of intrigue and deception that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let the mystery unfold. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The invitation arrives in the quaint village of St. Mary Mead. Where gossip flowed as freely as the afternoon tea, Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically like the ticking of a hidden clock. She was a woman of sharp eyes and sharper mind, known far and wide for her uncanny ability to unravel the knottiest of puzzles. On this particular crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced outside her window, a letter arrived that would pull her into a web of whispers and wonders. The envelope was elegant, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the emblem of a blooming rose. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and slit it open with her silver letter opener. Inside was an invitation from Lady Evelyn Hargrove, inviting her to a weekend gathering at Whispering Garden Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the rolling hills of Devon. "Dearest Miss Marple," the note read in flowing script, "your reputation as a keen observer precedes you. I humbly request your presence at my home for a small soiree. There are matters afoot that require a discerning eye such as yours." Intrigued, Miss Marple set down her knitting and pondered. Lady Hargrove was a widow of considerable wealth, rumoured to be entangled in family feuds over inheritance. Why summon an elderly spinster like herself? But Miss Marple's curiosity was piqued. She had a knack for sensing when something was amiss, much like how she could spot a dropped stitch in a complex pattern from across the room. Packing her modest suitcase with essentials, a warm shawl, her favourite herbal teas, and a notebook for jotting observations, Miss Marple boarded the train to Devon that very afternoon. The journey was pleasant, the countryside blurring past in hues of amber and green, but her mind raced ahead to the manor. She recalled snippets of village talk. Whispering Garden was so named for its legendary rose garden, where bushes seemed to murmur secrets on windy nights. Legends spoke of hidden treasures buried beneath the soil, guarded by thorny sentinels. Practical tips for any traveller in such tales? Always pack a magnifying glass, Miss Marple thought with a smile. Details are the devil's playground. Upon arrival at the station, a chauffeur in a crisp uniform awaited her, tipping his hat politely. "Miss Marple, Lady Hargrove sends her regards." The drive to the manor wound through misty lanes lined with ancient oaks, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. As the car approached, the estate loomed grandly, its ivy-clad walls glowing under the setting sun. Turrets pierced the sky, and the air carried the faint scent of roses even in autumn. Stepping out, Miss Marple was greeted by the butler, Mr. Graves, a tall man with a sombre expression that matched his name. "Welcome, madam. The other guests have arrived." Inside, the foyer was opulent, with crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light on polished marble floors. Lady Hargrove descended the staircase like a queen, her silk gown rustling softly. She was in her 50s, elegant with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held a shadow of worry. "Miss Marple, how delightful. Thank you for coming on such short notice." They exchanged pleasantries, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hostess's hand. A sign of nerves, perhaps? The guests assembled in the drawing room for pre-dinner drinks. There was Colonel Reginald Blake, a retired military man with a booming voice and a moustache that could hide secrets. He regaled the group with tales of his adventures in India, but Miss Marple observed how his eyes darted to Lady Hargrove's jewellery. Next was young Amelia Hargrove, Lady Evelyn's niece, a vivacious girl in her 20s with fiery red hair and a laugh that echoed too brightly, as if masking unease. She fidgeted with her necklace, a family heirloom sparkling with diamonds. Then came Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, A bespectacled man with a kind face, but hands that trembled slightly. Too much coffee or something more. And finally, Victor Langston, Lady Hargrove's solicitor, a sharp-featured fellow clutching a briefcase like a shield. He spoke little, but his gaze was calculating, assessing each person as if tallying assets. As cocktails were served, conversation turned to the garden. "It said the roses whisper prophecies," Amelia teased, her eyes twinkling. "Nonsense," Colonel Blake scoffed. "Just wind through the thorns." But Miss Marple, sipping her sherry, felt a chill. She excused herself to freshen up, wandering briefly into the hallway, where portraits of Hargrove ancestors stared down judgmentally. Dinner was a sumptuous affair in the dining hall, with candlelight flickering on silverware, roast pheasant, creamy potatoes, and a salad from the garden's own herbs. Talk flowed of estates and inheritances, with subtle tensions bubbling under the surface. Lady Hargrove mentioned revising her will, eliciting raised eyebrows from Victor and a forced smile from Amelia. Dr. Thorne discussed herbal remedies, hinting at poisons disguised as cures, a practical tip Miss Marple filed away. Always know your plants. After dessert, the group retired to the library, where a fire crackled warmly. Lady Hargrove pulled Miss Marple aside. "Jane, if I may call you that, there's been incidents. Threatening notes, shadows in the garden. I fear for my safety." Miss Marple nodded sagely. "Tell me everything, my dear." But before details could emerge, a scream pierced the night from outside. Rushing to the French doors, they beheld a ghastly sight. In the moonlit garden, a figure lay motionless amid the roses, a dark stain spreading on the ground. It was Mr. Graves, the butler, his face frozen in shock, a thorny stem clutched in his hand. Whispers seemed to rise from the bushes, as if the garden itself mourned or mocked. The police were summoned, but Miss Marple knew this was no accident. As Inspector Craddock arrived, gruff and efficient, she began her quiet observations. Footprints in the dew, a torn petal, a missing glove, clues that whispered of foul play. Who among the guests had motive? The Colonel, eyeing the fortune; Amelia, impatient for inheritance; the doctor, hiding a secret affair; the solicitor, manipulating documents. That night, as Miss Marple lay in her guest room, the wind howled, carrying faint murmurs from the garden. She jotted notes. Always trust your instincts, like spotting inconsistencies in a villager's alibi. The mystery had begun, and with it, a trail of secrets waiting to bloom. As the chapter closes on this chilling discovery, the whispers grow louder, hinting at deeper deceptions to come. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Roses, the Whispering Garden. Manor stood silent under a moon veiled by clouds, its rose garden now a crime scene cordoned off by Inspector Craddock's men. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unassuming sleuth, lingered near the French doors, her shawl draped over her shoulders as she peered into the night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and roses, but also with something heavier, suspicion. Mr. Graves, the butler, lay dead, his lifeless hand clutching a thorny stem, as if the garden itself had struck him down. To Miss Marple, every detail was a stitch in a tapestry of truth waiting to be woven. Her task now was to observe, listen, and unravel the secrets hidden among the manor's guests. Inspector Craddock, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense moustache, barked orders to his constables, who were combing the garden for clues. "Blunt force trauma," he muttered, crouching by the body. "Something heavy, maybe a garden tool." Miss Marple tilted her head, noting the inspector's focus on the obvious. In her experience, the obvious was rarely the whole story. She recalled a village lad who once blamed a broken fence on a storm, when a closer look revealed a neighbour's grudge and a well-aimed axe. Practical tip for sleuths: never trust the surface. Dig like you're tending a stubborn weed. Stepping carefully around the dewy grass, Miss Marple examined the scene. The rose bushes, meticulously pruned, formed a maze-like path, leading to a stone fountain at the garden's heart. Mr. Graves had fallen near a cluster of crimson blooms, their petals scattered like blood drops. She spotted a faint footprint in the soft soil, too small for a man's boot, perhaps a lady's shoe. Nearby, a single glove lay crumpled, embroidered with the initial A. Amelia Hargrove's, perhaps. Miss Marple tucked the observation away, like a skein of wool saved for later. Inside, the guests gathered in the drawing room, their faces pale under the chandelier's glow. Lady Evelyn Hargrove sat rigidly, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. Colonel Blake, puffing his chest, declared, "Cowardly act! Likely a vagrant sneaking about." But his bluster seemed forced, his eyes avoiding the garden windows. Amelia, perched on a velvet settee, dabbed her eyes dramatically, though Miss Marple noted they were curiously dry. Dr. Thorne offered her a glass of water, his hands steadier now, as if tragedy had sobered him. Victor Langston, the solicitor, stood apart, scribbling in a notebook, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm that calmed her mind and unnerved others. She listened as the group speculated. Amelia suggested, maybe Graves saw something he shouldn't have, like a thief in the garden. Victor's pen paused, and he glanced at her sharply. Dr. Thorne murmured about heart conditions, hinting Graves might have collapsed naturally, but Inspector Craddock's report of trauma quashed that theory. Miss Marple's needles paused too. She knew from village gossip that butlers often knew more than they let on. Secrets about late-night visitors or hidden letters. The inspector joined them, wiping mud from his boots. "Miss Marple, any thoughts?" he asked, half sceptical, half hopeful. She smiled demurely. "Only that gardens keep secrets as well as they keep roses." Craddock frowned, but didn't press. Instead, he questioned the guests. Lady Evelyn admitted Graves had been with the family for decades, loyal but reserved. "He mentioned odd noises in the garden lately," she added, her voice trembling. Colonel Blake scoffed. "Probably foxes." But Miss Marple recalled the threatening notes Lady Evelyn had mentioned. Were they linked to Graves's death? As the night wore on, Miss Marple proposed a practical step. "Might we examine Mr. Graves' quarters? Servants often keep mementos that speak louder than words." Craddock agreed, and the group, minus Amelia, who pleaded a headache, followed the butler's path to his small room off the kitchen. The space was Spartan, a narrow bed, a dresser, and a locked wooden box. Craddock pried it open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with twine. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Letters were like dropped stitches, betraying the pattern's flaws. The letters were from a woman named Clara, written years ago, pleading with Graves to keep a secret about the Hargrove legacy. One mentioned a hidden compartment in the library fireplace. Lady Evelyn gasped, claiming ignorance, but her fingers tightened on her handkerchief. Victor's jaw clenched, as if he knew more than he let on. Dr. Thorne adjusted his spectacles nervously, while Colonel Blake muttered about family nonsense. Miss Marple suggested they check the library, her tone mild but insistent, like a gardener coaxing a reluctant bloom. Back in the library, the fire still crackled, casting shadows on the bookshelves. Miss Marple knelt by the hearth, her fingers probing the stonework. A loose brick shifted, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a velvet pouch containing a single key, ornate and heavy, with a rose emblem matching Lady Evelyn's wax seal. "What does it unlock?" Amelia asked, having rejoined them, her voice sharp with curiosity. No one knew, but Miss Marple noted Victor's sudden interest, his eyes lingering on the key. Craddock took charge of the key, promising to investigate. As the group dispersed to their rooms, Miss Marple lingered, her mind weaving connections. The key, the letters, the glove. Each was a clue, like threads in a complex pattern. She recalled a village scandal where a stolen key had unlocked not just a safe, but a family's hidden shame. Practical tip: Always check what a key fits. It's often the door to truth. Outside, the wind stirred the roses, their whispers seeming to mock the manor's secrets. Miss Marple retired to her room but couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, knitting and thinking. Graves had known something, perhaps about the Hargrove fortune or a betrayal long buried. The glove suggested Amelia's involvement, but was it too obvious? And why was Victor so guarded? Dr. Thorne's trembling hands hinted at guilt, while Colonel Blake's bravado felt like a mask. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the garden in soft pinks, Miss Marple made a mental note. Observe breakfast closely. People reveal their true selves over toast and tea, when nerves fray and tongues loosen. She tucked her notebook away, her mind already anticipating the next clue. The whispers of the garden grow sharper, urging us deeper into the mystery. What does the key unlock, and who among the guests holds the truth? The trail of secrets winds on, promising more revelations in the shadows. Chapter 3. The key's secret morning light spilled through the tall windows of Whispering Garden Manor, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Miss Jane Marple, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, sipped her tea and observed the subtle tells of her companions. The air was thick with unspoken questions, the weight of last night's grim discovery lingering like mist over the estate. The ornate key found in the library fireplace lay heavy on everyone's mind, its rose emblem glinting in the sunlight as Inspector Craddock placed it on the table for all to see. Lady Evelyn Hargrove, her face pale but composed, broke the silence. That key, it must belong to something on the estate. Perhaps the old greenhouse. It's been locked for years. Her voice held a tremor, betraying more than she intended. Miss Marple noted the way her fingers lingered near her teacup, as if anchoring herself to something solid. Colonel Blake, his moustache bristling, leaned forward. Greenhouse, full of rusted tools and cobwebs, I'd wager. Nothing worth killing over. His tone was dismissive, but his eyes flicked to the key with a hunger that belied his words. Amelia Hargrove, her red hair catching the light like fire, toyed with her spoon, her earlier theatrics replaced by a quiet intensity. What if it opens something valuable? Grandfather always talked about hidden treasures in the garden. Her words hung in the air, drawing a sharp glance from Victor Langston, the solicitor, who set down his coffee with deliberate care. Family legends are often just that, legends, he said, his voice smooth but edged, like a blade wrapped in silk. Dr. Thorne, stirring sugar into his tea, said nothing, but his glasses slipped down his nose, a sign of distraction Miss Marple didn't miss. Inspector Craddock, ever practical, announced his plan to search the greenhouse after breakfast. If this key fits, we might find answers. Everyone, stay close. Miss Marple, nibbling a scone, agreed to join, her curiosity as sharp as ever. The group finished their meal in near silence, the clink of cutlery louder than conversation. As they rose, Miss Marple caught Amelia slipping a small silver compact into her pocket, its surface scratched as if it had been dropped or thrown. The greenhouse stood at the garden's edge, its glass panels clouded with age and neglect. Ivy curled around its iron frame, giving it the look of a forgotten relic. Craddock inserted the key into the rusted lock, and with a groan, the door swung open, releasing a musty scent of earth and decay. Inside, sunlight filtered through grimy panes, illuminating rows of empty planters and tangled vines. Miss Marple stepped carefully, her sensible shoes crunching on broken glass. The air felt heavy, as if the greenhouse held its breath. At the far end stood a locked cabinet, its wood warped but sturdy, bearing the same rose emblem as the key. Craddock tried the key, and it clicked smoothly, revealing a collection of dusty ledgers and a small, leather-bound diary. Lady Evelyn's breath caught. "Those belong to my late husband, Lord Hargrove," she whispered. "He was obsessed with the garden's history." Craddock handed the diary to Miss Marple, who opened it gingerly, its pages yellowed but legible. The diary detailed Lord Hargrove's search for a rumoured family treasure, a cache of jewels hidden by an ancestor during a time of war. Entries spoke of a secret vault beneath the garden, its location marked by the heart of the rose. Miss Marple's lips pursed. She recalled village tales of hidden wealth, often dismissed as fancy, but now seeming all too real. Colonel Blake snorted. "Fool's errand. If there were jewels, they'd have been found years ago." But his hand twitched, as if itching to search. Amelia, peering over Miss Marple's shoulder, pointed to a sketch in the diary, a map of the rose garden with a star at its centre, near the fountain. "That's where we should look," she said, her voice too eager. Victor's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, as if to memorize the map. Dr. Thorne, lingering near the cabinet, picked up a ledger, flipping through it with a frown. "These record plant shipments. Odd for such an old greenhouse," he muttered, almost to himself. Craddock decided to investigate the fountain immediately, and the group trekked back through the garden, the roses seeming to lean closer as they passed. At the fountain, its stone basin cracked but still holding water, they searched for anything unusual. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers brushing the mossy base, when she noticed a faint seam, a hidden panel perhaps. Before she could speak, Amelia cried out, pointing to a glint in the water. Craddock fished out a small locket, its chain broken, but its rose-shaped clasp intact. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Lady Evelyn. "That's my mother," Lady Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. "She died when I was young, but why is this here?" Her eyes met Miss Marple's, pleading for answers. The group fell silent, the locket's discovery raising more questions than it answered. Was it a clue to the treasure? Or something more? Personal? Miss Marple tucked the locket into her pocket for safekeeping, her mind racing. She noticed Victor watching her closely, his expression unreadable. As Craddock's men scoured the fountain for more clues, Miss Marple wandered a few steps away, her eyes scanning the rose bushes. A torn scrap of fabric caught her attention, snagged on a thorn, silk, the same shade as Amelia's dress from last night. She slipped it into her sleeve, her face betraying nothing. The garden seemed to hum with secrets, its whispers growing more insistent. Back at the manor, lunch was a tense affair, with everyone lost in their thoughts. Colonel Blake complained about the police presence, while Amelia chattered nervously about the locket, suggesting it was a romantic keepsake. Dr. Thorne remained quiet, his fingers drumming on the table, and Victor excused himself early, citing paperwork. Miss Marple, eating her soup, felt the weight of the locket in her pocket and the fabric in her sleeve. Each clue was a thread, and she was determined to weave them together. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Craddock announced plans to dig near the fountain, guided by the diary's map. Miss Marple volunteered to assist, her keen eyes ready to spot what others missed. The group dispersed, but she lingered in the dining room, overhearing a hushed argument between Lady Evelyn and Victor in the hall. "You knew about the diary, didn't you?" Lady Evelyn hissed. Victor's reply was too low to catch, but his tone was defensive. The gardener waited, its roses swaying as if beckoning. Miss Marple tightened her shawl, her mind sharp as a needle, ready to pierce the veil of deception. The vault, the locket, the torn silk. What did they mean? And who was desperate enough to kill to protect them? The whispers grow darker, pulling us closer to the heart of the mystery. The garden holds its secrets tight, but the truth is beginning to bloom, one clue at a time. Chapter 4. Beneath the fountain, the afternoon sun hung low over Whispering Garden Manor, casting golden rays that danced across the rose garden, where the air buzzed with the quiet tension of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Miss Jane Marple stood near the stone fountain, her shawl pulled tight against the autumn chill, as Inspector Craddock's men prepared to dig. The diary's map, with its star marking the heart of the rose, had led them here, and the discovery of the locket only deepened the mystery. Miss Marple's keen eyes swept over the group, noting every glance, every fidget, as the shovels bit into the earth. Craddock supervised the dig, his face set in determination. The guests hovered nearby, their curiosity barely masking their unease. Lady Evelyn Hargrove stood closest, her posture rigid, as if bracing for what might be found. Colonel Blake paced, his boots scuffing the grass, muttering about wasted effort, while his eyes betrayed a flicker of anticipation. Amelia Hargrove, her red hair tied back, leaned against a tree, her fingers twisting a bracelet, her gaze darting between the fountain and the manor. Dr. Thorne lingered at the edge, clutching a ledger from the greenhouse, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with a private thought. Victor Langston, the solicitor, stood apart, his briefcase at his feet, watching the scene with the intensity of a hawk. The shovels struck something solid, and a collective gasp rose from the group. Craddock knelt, brushing away dirt to reveal a small iron box, its surface etched with the same rose emblem as the key. The lock clicked open under the key's touch, revealing a velvet-lined interior containing a single document, a faded deed to a plot of land, signed by an ancestor of the Hargrove family. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened. "That's the deed to the eastern fields," she said, her voice trembling. "Father said it was lost decades ago. It's worth a fortune now, with developers circling." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Land disputes often stirred darker motives than jewels. Colonel Blake snorted, crossing his arms. "A piece of paper? Hardly worth digging for." But his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noticed his fingers clench briefly. Amelia stepped forward, her eyes bright. "This could change everything. Those fields could make us rich." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance. She shot toward Victor, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. Dr. Thorne, flipping through the ledger, murmured, "This mentions shipments to those fields. Strange for barren land." His words hung in the air, unanswered. Craddock bagged the deed for evidence, but Miss Marple's attention drifted to the fountain itself. She circled it, her fingers tracing the cracked stone, pausing at the seam she'd noticed earlier. With a gentle push, a small panel shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a crumpled letter, its ink smudged but legible. It was addressed to Lady Evelyn's mother, signed with a single initial, E. The letter spoke of a promise broken and a debt unpaid, hinting at a betrayal tied to the Hargrove fortune. Miss Marple slipped the letter into her pocket, her face serene but her mind racing. As the group returned to the manor, the mood was heavy. Lady Evelyn seemed shaken, clutching the locket Miss Marple had returned to her. "This letter, it must be from Edward, my mother's suitor before she married father," she said softly. "He vanished after their engagement ended." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on village scandals where old loves left long shadows. She observed Victor lingering near Lady Evelyn, his hand brushing her arm as if in comfort, though his eyes were cold. Dinner that evening was a strained affair, the clatter of plates unable to mask the undercurrent of suspicion. Amelia tried to lighten the mood, chatting about the deed's potential, but her laughter rang hollow. Colonel Blake, pouring himself a generous brandy, grumbled about family greed while eyeing the others. Dr. Thorne ate sparingly, his gaze fixed on the ledger he'd brought to the table, its pages open to entries about unusual plant deliveries. Victor, cutting his meat with precision, spoke little, but listened intently, his silence louder than words. Miss Marple, savouring her roast lamb, let the conversation flow around her, her knitting needles idle but her mind weaving connections. The deed, the letter, the locket, each pointed to a past tangled with promises and betrayals. She recalled a village farmer who'd hidden a deed to settle a feud, only to spark a greater one. The eastern fields, she mused, might be more than land. They could be a motive for murder. After dinner, as the group retired to the parlour, Miss Marple excused herself to stroll the garden, the moonlight casting eerie patterns through the roses. She paused by the fountain, where the dig site lay open like a wound. A faint glint caught her eye. A silver cigarette case, half buried in the loosened soil. Its monogram read R.B., Colonel Blake's initials. She tucked it away, her expression unchanged, but her thoughts turned to the Colonel's restless pacing. Returning to the manor, she overheard a heated exchange in the library. Amelia's voice, sharp and accusing, cut through the door. "You knew about the deed, didn't you? You've been planning this." Victor's reply was calm but icy. "Careful, Amelia. Some secrets are best left buried." Miss Marple retreated before they noticed her, her heart quickening. The garden's whispers seemed to follow her, urging her to dig deeper. In her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her notebook open. She jotted down the day's findings, the deed's value, the letter's hint of betrayal, the cigarette case tying Blake to the scene. Each clue was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. She glanced at the roses outside, their petals swaying as if sharing secrets with the night. The mystery tightens its grip, with the garden revealing fragments of a buried past. What lies beneath the surface, and who will risk everything to keep it hidden? The whispers grow urgent, pulling us toward the next revelation. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Night. The moon hung high over Whispering Garden Manor, its pale light filtering through the rose garden, where shadows twisted like secrets refusing to stay buried. Miss Jane Marple sat by her bedroom window, her knitting needles still, her mind a whirl of threads, each clue a stitch in a pattern growing clearer yet more perilous. The manor was quiet, but the silence felt alive, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the next move in this deadly game. As the clock struck midnight, Miss Marple heard a faint creak from the hallway. Slipping on her shawl, she moved silently to the door, her senses sharp. Peering out, she saw a figure glide past, cloaked in shadow, heading toward the staircase. The silhouette was slight, feminine. Amelia, perhaps? Miss Marple followed, her steps soft as a cat's, guided by the faint glow of wall sconces. The figure descended to the ground floor, pausing at the library door before slipping inside. Miss Marple waited, her heart steady, her curiosity sharper than ever. Inside the library, the fire had died to embers, casting a dim glow over shelves of leather-bound books. Miss Marple eased the door open just enough to see Amelia, her red hair unmistakable, rifling through a desk drawer. She pulled out a small notebook, its cover worn, and flipped through it feverishly. Her face, illuminated by a candle, was taut with urgency. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She recalled a village girl who'd hidden a diary to conceal a forbidden romance. Notebooks, like gardens, held secrets. Amelia froze, as if sensing a presence, and slipped the notebook into her dressing gown before hurrying out. Miss Marple let her go, choosing instead to examine the desk. The drawer yielded nothing but old receipts and a broken pen, but under a blotter she found a torn photograph. Half of a couple, the man's face missing, but the woman's dress matched the one in the locket's picture. A clue or a coincidence? Miss Marple tucked the fragment away, her mind turning to the letter signed E and its hint of betrayal. Returning to the hall, she heard voices from the parlor. Creeping closer, she recognized Colonel Blake's gruff tone and Dr. Thorne's softer one. "You're in over your head, Elias," Blake growled. "Keep your mouth shut, or you'll regret it." Dr. Thorne's reply was a murmur, too low to catch, but his voice trembled. Miss Marple lingered, unseen, as the men parted, Blake's heavy steps fading toward his room, Thorne lingering by the window, staring into the garden. She followed Dr. Thorne's gaze, noticing a faint light flickering among the roses. Someone else was out there. Slipping outside through a side door, Miss Marple moved cautiously, the night air sharp with the scent of earth. The light came from a lantern near the greenhouse, where Victor Langston stood, his back to her, digging in the soil. His movements were precise, almost desperate, as if searching for something specific. Miss Marple crouched behind a bush, her heart quickening. What could the solicitor want in the dead of night? Victor unearthed a small tin, rusted but intact, and pried it open. From her vantage point, Miss Marple couldn't see its contents, but Victor's shoulders stiffened, and he quickly pocketed something before reburying the tin. As he turned to leave, his lantern caught a glint of metal on the ground. A pocket watch, its chain tangled in the grass. Miss Marple waited until he was gone before retrieving it. The watch was engraved with E.T., Dr. Thorne's initials. Had he dropped it earlier, or was it planted? Back in her room, Miss Marple examined her findings by lamplight. The photograph fragment, the watch, the overheard threats. Each added to the tapestry. She recalled a village theft where a lost watch had exposed a liar. Timing, she knew, was everything. Opening her notebook, she jotted down the night's events, circling Dr. Thorne's name, his nervous demeanour, his ledger obsession, and now his watch in the garden. Too many coincidences. At breakfast, the mood was brittle, the guests' faces etched with sleeplessness. Lady Evelyn, sipping tea, seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the window. Colonel Blake ate heartily, but his laughter felt forced, his gaze avoiding Dr. Thorne, who sat pale and silent, his hands unsteady. Amelia, unusually subdued, picked at her toast, her eyes flicking to Victor, who read a newspaper with studied calm. Miss Marple, spreading jam on her scone, observed the tension like a chessboard, each player guarding their moves. Inspector Craddock joined them, announcing a new lead. A groundskeeper had reported seeing a stranger near the garden the night of the murder, wearing a dark coat. "We're widening the search," he said, but Miss Marple sensed he was grasping at straws. She mentioned the watch casually, watching Dr. Thorne's reaction. His hand jerked, spilling tea, and he stammered, I lost it weeks ago." No one else reacted, but Miss Marple noted Victor's brief glance at Thorne, sharp and knowing. After breakfast, Miss Marple joined Craddock in the garden, where he was re-examining the fountain's dig site. She pointed out the disturbed soil near the greenhouse, suggesting a closer look. Craddock's men dug, uncovering nothing but a broken trowel. Disappointed, Craddock turned away, but Miss Marple lingered, her eyes catching a faint outline in the dirt. A trapdoor, cleverly concealed under a layer of moss. She called Craddock back, her voice calm but firm. The trapdoor, heavy with age, creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Craddock fetched a lantern, and Miss Marple followed, her steps careful. The air below was damp, smelling of stone and secrets. At the bottom was a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves holding dusty bottles, some labelled as wine, others unmarked. One bottle, half hidden, bore a label reading 4E. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The initial matched the letter and the locket's mystery. Craddock bagged the bottle for analysis, suspecting poison. Miss Marple, climbing back to the surface, felt the garden's whispers grow louder, as if urging her to connect the dots. The photograph, the watch, the bottle, all pointed to a past that refused to stay buried. Who was E, and what had they done to spark such deadly consequences? As the day waned, Miss Marple sat in the parlour, her knitting resumed, her mind racing. The manor's secrets were unravelling, but danger lurked closer with each clue. The night's discoveries had tightened the web, and someone she knew was watching her every move. The garden's whispers turned to warnings as the past creeps closer to the present. Who holds the key to the truth, and what will they do to keep it hidden? The mystery deepens, drawing us into its thorny embrace. Chapter 6. The Hidden Truth. The morning mist clung to the rose garden of Whispering Garden Manor, softening the edges of the thorny bushes as if trying to hush their whispers. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped over her shoulders, stood in the dining room, her eyes scanning the breakfast table where the guests sat, their faces taut with unease. The discovery of the underground chamber and the mysterious bottle labelled 4E had cast a darker shadow over the manor, and the air crackled with suspicion. Miss Marple's mind wove the clues together, each one a stitch pulling the pattern of deceit into focus. Lady Evelyn Hargrove, her hands trembling slightly, poured tea with forced calm. "That bottle, it could be nothing, just old wine," she said, her voice thin. Colonel Blake, slicing his bacon, grunted in agreement, but his eyes darted to the door, as if expecting an interruption. Amelia Hargrove, her usual vibrancy dimmed, stared at her plate, her fingers tracing the edge of her napkin. Dr. Thorne, his glasses fogging slightly from the steam of his coffee, muttered about chemical analysis, his voice barely audible. Victor Langston, the solicitor, folded his newspaper with precision, his gaze lingering on Lady Evelyn with an intensity that made Miss Marple's skin prickle. Inspector Craddock entered, his face grim. "The bottle's contents are at the lab," he announced. "Early tests suggest it's not wine, possibly a toxin. We're treating it as evidence." A hush fell over the table, broken only by the clink of a spoon as Amelia dropped hers. Miss Marple noted the girl's pallor, her eyes wide with something more than surprise. Fear, perhaps. Craddock continued. "I'll need statements from everyone about their whereabouts 2 nights ago, before the incident." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Dr. Thorne, who shifted uncomfortably. After breakfast, Miss Marple followed Craddock to the library, where he set up a makeshift office. She offered to assist with the interviews, her gentle demeanour disarming yet deliberate. First was Colonel Blake, who strode in with his usual bluster. "I was in my room reading military history," he declared, his moustache twitching. "Heard nothing, saw nothing." But Miss Marple noticed his fingers drumming on his knee, a rhythm of unease. She recalled a village shopkeeper who'd lied about his whereabouts, betrayed by a nervous tic. Amelia was next, her voice bright but brittle. "I was in the parlour playing cards with myself," she said, laughing nervously. "I didn't go near the garden." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the girl's bracelet, noticing a fresh scratch. Had she snagged it on a rosebush? Dr. Thorne followed, his hands clasped tightly. "I was reviewing patient records in my room," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes avoiding Craddock's. Miss Marple wondered about the ledger he'd been so engrossed in. Did it hold more than plant records? Victor Langston entered last, his demeanour cool. "I was drafting legal papers in the study," he said, his words clipped. "The garden holds no interest for me." But Miss Marple remembered his midnight digging, the tin he'd unearthed. What had he taken, and why hide it? She kept silent, her face serene, but her mind catalogued every inconsistency. As the interviews ended, Miss Marple slipped away to the greenhouse, drawn by a nagging thought. The ledgers Dr. Thorne had studied mentioned shipments to the eastern fields, tied to the deed found under the fountain. She examined the shelves, her fingers brushing over dusty tools until she found a small, locked box tucked behind a planter. Forcing it open with a hairpin, she discovered a bundle of receipts, payments for rare plants, signed by E. Thorne. Her pulse quickened. The initials matched the bottle and the letter. Was Dr. Thorne connected to Lady Evelyn's mother's mysterious suitor? Returning to the manor, Miss Marple overheard a tense exchange in the hallway. Lady Evelyn's voice was sharp. You've been hiding things, Elias. I trusted you. Dr. Thorne's reply was a low plea. It was for your protection, Evelyn. Miss Marple paused, unseen, as the conversation ended abruptly with footsteps retreating. She made a mental note. Trust once broken often led to desperate acts. At lunch, the atmosphere was stifling, the guests barely speaking. Amelia pushed her food around her plate, her eyes darting to Dr. Thorne, who ate in silence. Colonel Blake, unusually subdued, sipped his water, his earlier bravado gone. Victor, cutting his salad with precision, caught Miss Marple's gaze and held it a moment too long, as if gauging her thoughts. Lady Evelyn excused herself early, claiming a headache, but Miss Marple saw her slip a small key into her pocket. Not the rose emblem key, but something smaller. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the garden alone, drawn to the trapdoor near the greenhouse. She descended the staircase again, her lantern casting shadows on the stone walls. Among the shelves, she noticed a faint carving, a rose entwined with the letter E. Brushing away cobwebs, she found a hidden panel, revealing a small, locked diary. The lock was too complex for her hairpin, but the cover bore the initials E.H. Evelyn Hargrove or her mother? She tucked the diary under her shawl, determined to open it later. As dusk fell, Miss Marple joined Craddock in the parlour, where he shared a new finding. The groundskeeper's stranger was likely a local poacher, unrelated to the case. "We're back to the guests," he admitted, frustration in his voice. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the diary and the receipts. She suggested checking Dr. Thorne's room for the ledger, suspecting it held more clues. Craddock agreed, and they found the ledger on his desk, open to a page listing deliveries of belladonna, a plant known for its deadly properties. Miss Marple's lips tightened. The bottle's toxin now had a possible source. Dinner was a quiet affair, the guests' eyes heavy with secrets. Miss Marple, eating her soup, felt the weight of the diary in her room and the receipts in her pocket. The Manor's past was unravelling, thread by thread, but each revelation brought danger closer. She caught Victor watching Amelia, his expression unreadable, and Colonel Blake's hand lingering near his pocket, as if checking for something missing. As the evening ended, Miss Marple retired to her room, locking the door. She sat by the lamp, her notebook open, the diary beside her. The garden's whispers seemed to seep through the window, urging her to unlock the truth. Who was E, and what had they done to spark murder? The answer lay close, hidden in the shadows of the Manor's heart. The mystery coils tighter, its thorns pricking at the truth. The past whispers louder, and the danger grows as the clues align, leading us deeper into the garden's secrets. Chapter 7. The Diary's Secrets. Twilight draped Whispering Garden Manor in a soft purple haze, the rose garden outside glowing faintly as if guarding its secrets with a thorny embrace. Miss Jane Marple sat in her room, the locked diary from the underground chamber resting on her lap. Its leather cover, marked with E.H., felt heavy with untold stories. The manor hummed with tension, each guest a piece in a puzzle that grew more intricate with every passing hour. Miss Marple's fingers traced the diary's lock, her mind sharp as she prepared to unravel another thread of the mystery. Using a small tool from her sewing kit, Miss Marple carefully pried open the diary's lock, revealing pages filled with elegant looping handwriting. The entries, dated decades ago, were written by Evelyn Hargrove's mother, Eleanor Hargrove. They spoke of a forbidden love with a man named Edward Thorne. Dr. Thorne's father, perhaps. The entries detailed secret meetings in the rose garden, promises of a future together, and a bitter falling out over a family secret tied to the eastern fields. Edward swore to protect me, but the truth about the land must stay buried, one entry read. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The deed and the bottle labelled 4E now carried a deeper weight. A sudden noise, a soft thump from downstairs, broke her focus. Slipping the diary into her knitting bag, Miss Marple crept to the door, her senses alert. The hallway was dark, but a faint light flickered from the staircase, leading to the ground floor. She followed, her steps silent, and paused outside the parlour. Inside, Colonel Blake stood by the fireplace, his back to the door, muttering to himself as he examined a small object. A ring, glinting in the firelight. Miss Marple watched as he slipped it into his pocket, his movements furtive like a man hiding a stolen prize. She retreated before he noticed, her mind racing. The ring, was it tied to Eleanor's love story, or something more sinister? She recalled a village widow who'd kept a ring to conceal a shameful pact. Objects, she knew, often held the key to motives. Returning to her room, Miss Marple jotted down the sighting in her notebook, circling Colonel Blake's name alongside Dr. Thorne's. The past was bleeding into the present, and the manor's guests were entangled in its thorns. At breakfast, the air was thick with unease. Lady Evelyn, her eyes shadowed, barely touched her toast, her gaze distant. Amelia, forcing a smile, chatted about the weather, but her hands trembled as she poured cream. Dr. Thorne, his face pale, kept his eyes on his plate, avoiding Colonel Blake, who sat with a smug air, his hand resting near his pocket. Victor Langston, sipping coffee, watched the group with a calculating stare, his silence more telling than words. Miss Marple, buttering her muffin, observed the unspoken alliances and rivalries, each gesture a clue. Inspector Craddock joined them, his expression grim. The lab confirmed the bottle contains belladonna extract, deadly in small doses, he said. It matches the toxin found in Mr. Graves's system. A gasp rippled through the table. Amelia's cup clattered, and Dr. Thorne's fork froze mid-air. Miss Marple noted Lady Evelyn's sudden stillness, her knuckles white around her napkin. Craddock added, "We're searching everyone's rooms today, no exceptions." The announcement hung heavy, and Miss Marple sensed the net tightening around the guilty. After breakfast, she slipped into the library, drawn to the desk where Amelia had searched. Rifling through the shelves, she found a hidden compartment behind a row of books, containing a faded love letter from Edward Thorne to Eleanor. "The fields are our future, but they demand a price," it read. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The eastern fields, tied to the deed, were clearly more than land. She tucked the letter away, her thoughts on Dr. Thorne's connection to his father's past. As Craddock's men began their search, Miss Marple joined them in Dr. Thorne's room. Among his medical books, they found a vial of belladonna extract, half empty, hidden in a false-bottomed drawer. Dr. Thorne, summoned to explain, stammered, "It's for research, purely medicinal," but his eyes betrayed panic. Miss Marple watched Victor standing nearby, his lips curling slightly as if pleased by the find. Was he deflecting suspicion, or had he planted the vial? At lunch, the mood was electric with fear. Amelia, her voice sharp, accused Dr. Thorne of hiding secrets. "You knew about the poison, didn't you?" she snapped. Thorne's face flushed, but he said nothing. Colonel Blake laughed, too loudly, dismissing the accusation, while Lady Evelyn stared at her plate, her silence heavy. Victor, cutting his chicken with precision, offered a bland comment about evidence, but Miss Marple caught his glance at Amelia, a warning in his eyes. That afternoon, Miss Marple wandered the garden, her thoughts on the diary and the letter. Near the fountain, she noticed a freshly turned patch of soil, too neat to be natural. Kneeling, she uncovered a small cloth bag containing a single pearl earring, its twin missing. She recalled Amelia wearing a similar pair at dinner. Slipping the earring into her pocket, she felt the garden's whispers grow sharper, as if pointing to the next clue. As evening fell, Miss Marple overheard a hushed conversation in the hallway. Colonel Blake's voice was low, urgent. "Keep quiet, or we're both done for." Amelia's reply was a whisper. "I didn't sign up for this." Miss Marple retreated, her heart pounding. The ring, the earring, the vial, each piece fit into a pattern of greed and betrayal, but the full picture remained just out of reach. In her room, Miss Marple opened the diary again, finding a final entry. Edward's plan will destroy us all. I must act. The words chilled her, echoing the bottle's deadly intent. She locked her door, her knitting needles still, as the manor's secrets pressed closer, the truth tantalizingly near. The garden's whispers turned to accusations, each clue tightening the noose. Who paid the price for the past and who will fall next? The mystery unravels, drawing us closer to the heart of the truth. Chapter 8. The Tangled Web. The dawn broke over Whispering Garden Manor, painting the rose garden in hues of pink and gold. Yet the beauty did little to ease the suffocating tension within. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm that belied the storm of thoughts in her mind. The manor's secrets were piling up like fallen petals, each clue, Eleanor's diary, the belladonna vial, the pearl earring, pointing to a web of deceit that bound the guests together. The air felt charged, as if the truth were a spark waiting to ignite. Breakfast was a silent affair, the clink of cutlery sharp against the strain. Lady Evelyn Hargrove, her face drawn, sipped her tea with unsteady hands, her eyes avoiding the others. Colonel Blake, his usual bluster muted, chewed his toast mechanically, his hand straying to his pocket where Miss Marple knew the ring was hidden. Amelia Hargrove, her red hair loose and wild, pushed her eggs around her plate, her gaze flickering nervously toward the window. Dr. Thorne, his glasses slipping, stared at his coffee, his fingers twitching as if itching to flee. Victor Langston, ever composed, read a letter with feigned disinterest, but Miss Marple caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Inspector Craddock entered, his boots heavy on the polished floor. "The vial's fingerprints are being analysed," he announced. "We also found traces of belladonna in a teacup from the night of the murder, used by Mr. Graves." A murmur rippled through the group, and Miss Marple noted Dr. Thorne's sudden pallor, his hand gripping the table. Craddock's eyes swept the room. "Someone here knows more than they're saying. Speak now, or it'll go harder for you." Silence answered him, thick with unspoken guilt. Miss Marple, setting down her tea, suggested a walk through the manor's upper rooms, claiming a need for fresh air, but intending to search for more clues. Craddock agreed, assigning a constable to accompany her. As they climbed the staircase, Miss Marple paused at a portrait of Eleanor Hargrove, her serene face a mirror to Lady Evelyn's. The frame was slightly askew, and behind it she found a folded note, its edges brittle. It read, "Meet me at the fountain midnight. E.T. Edward Thorne again." She slipped it into her sleeve, her heart quickening at the connection to the past. In Amelia's room, Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a glint beneath the bed, a pearl earring, the twin to the one found in the garden. She left it undisturbed, noting its presence as a constable watched. Next, in Colonel Blake's room, she spotted a military journal, its pages bookmarked with a ribbon that matched the silk scrap from the rose bushes. The journal's margin held a scrawled note, "Fields deal, 10% cut." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The Colonel's greed was clearer now, tied to the valuable eastern fields. Returning downstairs, she overheard a sharp exchange in the study. Victor's voice, low and menacing, cut through the door. "You've gone too far, Amelia. Back off, or you'll regret it." Amelia's reply was defiant. "I'm not the only one with secrets here." Miss Marple retreated, her mind weaving the conversation into the pattern. Victor's control was slipping, and Amelia's boldness suggested she knew something dangerous. At lunch, the tension crackled. Dr. Thorne, attempting conversation, mentioned a rare plant he'd studied, belladonna's cousin, used in old remedies. His voice faltered under Craddock's stare, and Miss Marple noted Amelia's quick glance at him, as if weighing his words. Lady Evelyn, pushing her salad aside, murmured about her mother's love for gardening, her voice tinged with sorrow. Colonel Blake, draining his wine, scoffed at sentimental nonsense. But his hand lingered near his pocket, protective of the ring. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the rose garden, drawn to the fountain's base. Kneeling, she examined the stone, finding a faint scratch, a mark from a tool, perhaps used to pry open the hidden compartment. Nearby, a crushed rose petal lay, its scent sharp, and beside it a button engraved with a military insignia. Colonel Blake's. She pocketed it, her thoughts on his late-night prowling and the journal's note. As dusk settled, Craddock gathered everyone in the library, revealing a new find. The teacup's fingerprints matched Dr. Thorne's. "Care to explain, Doctor?" Craddock asked, his tone hard. Thorne's face crumpled. "I handled the cup earlier that day, serving tea. It's not what you think." His voice broke, and Miss Marple saw Victor's eyes gleam, as if savouring the moment. Amelia, her hands clenched, stared at the floor, while Lady Evelyn's gaze darted to Thorne, a mix of fear and pity. Miss Marple spoke softly, suggesting they revisit the underground chamber, suspecting more clues. Craddock agreed, and the group descended, the air cold and heavy. Among the shelves, Miss Marple spotted a small sealed envelope tucked behind a bottle. It was addressed to "My dearest E", and inside was a sketch of the rose garden with an X near a specific bush. "Another map," she murmured, handing it to Craddock. The bush, when checked, revealed nothing but loose soil, but Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint, a silver cufflink, monogrammed VL, Victor Langston's. Dinner was a strained ritual, the guests barely speaking. Miss Marple, eating her fish, felt the weight of her discoveries. The note, the earring, the button, the cufflink. Each tied a guest to the garden, to the past, to murder. She caught Lady Evelyn watching her, a flicker of desperation in her eyes, as if pleading for answers. Colonel Blake's hand stayed near his pocket, and Amelia's fingers twisted her napkin into knots. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, her notebook open. The manor's secrets were closing in, the web tightening around the guilty. The garden's whispers grew fierce, as if demanding the truth be unearthed before another fell to its thorns. The mystery's threads knot tighter, each clue a step closer to unmasking the killer. The past and present collide, and the garden's secrets refuse to stay buried, pulling us toward the final reckoning. Chapter 9. The Thorn of Truth. The rose garden of Whispering Garden Manor shimmered under a pale afternoon sky, its blooms swaying as if whispering accusations in the breeze. Miss Jane Marple stood in the library, her knitting bag at her side, the weight of her collected clues, the note, the earring, the button, the cufflink, pressing on her mind like thorns. The manor's air was thick with dread, each guest moving as if on a tightrope, aware that the truth was close to piercing the veil of deception. Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing, her thoughts stitching together a pattern that was nearly complete. Lunch had just ended, the guests' silence louder than their sparse words. Lady Evelyn Hargrove, her hands folded tightly, had barely eaten, her gaze fixed on a distant point. Colonel Blake, his face flushed from wine, kept his hand near his pocket, guarding his secret ring. Amelia Hargrove, her red hair pulled back, fidgeted with her bracelet, her eyes darting to the door. Dr. Thorne, his glasses fogged, pushed his plate away, his fingers trembling. Victor Langston, slicing his apple with surgical precision, watched the others like a predator sizing up prey. Miss Marple, sipping her water, felt the tension coil tighter, sensing the moment of revelation was near. Inspector Craddock entered, his face stern. "The fingerprint analysis on the vial is complete," he announced. "Dr. Thorne's prints are confirmed, but there's another set, partial, unidentifiable." A murmur ran through the group, and Dr. Thorne's face drained of colour, his voice a whisper. "I told you, it's a mistake." Miss Marple noted Victor's slight smirk, quickly hidden, and Amelia's sharp intake of breath. Craddock added, "We also found traces of belladonna in a glass from the parlour, used the same night, the room stilled," and Miss Marple's mind flashed to the teacup, the vial, and the garden's deadly harvest. She suggested examining the parlour, where the glass was found, and Craddock agreed. The room was elegant, its velvet curtains heavy with dust. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the furniture, pausing at a side table where a crystal decanter sat, its stopper loose. She lifted it, catching a faint, bitter scent. Belladonna, perhaps. Handing it to Craddock, she said nothing, but her glance urged him to test it. Nearby, she spotted a crumpled handkerchief, embroidered with A.H., Amelia's. She left it for the constable to collect, her thoughts on the girl's nervous glances. As Craddock's men bagged the decanter, Miss Marple slipped upstairs to Lady Evelyn's room, driven by a hunch. The door was ajar, and inside, Lady Evelyn stood by her dresser, clutching a small velvet box. Seeing Miss Marple, she flinched, the box slipping to the floor. It spilled open, revealing a gold locket, not the one from the fountain, but similar, with a rose clasp. "It was my mother's," Lady Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "She gave it to me before she died." Miss Marple nodded, her mind linking the lockets to Eleanor's love story and the mysterious Edward. Returning to the garden, Miss Marple paused by the rosebush marked on the sketch, where Victor's cufflink had been found. She knelt, her fingers sifting through the soil, uncovering a small, tarnished key, different from the rose emblem one, but eerily similar to the one Lady Evelyn had pocketed. It bore the initials E.T. Edward Thorne. Her pulse quickened. The key suggested another lock, another secret, perhaps tied to the eastern fields or the manor itself. At tea, the atmosphere was suffocating. Amelia, her voice sharp, accused Victor of manipulating the investigation. "You're too calm, always watching," she snapped. Victor's eyes narrowed, his reply cold. "Careful, Amelia. You're not as innocent as you play." Colonel Blake laughed, a harsh bark, but his hand gripped his cup tightly. Dr. Thorne, silent, stared at the table, while Lady Evelyn's eyes met Miss Marple's, pleading for clarity. Miss Marple, nibbling a biscuit, felt the clues aligning, the pattern almost clear. That evening, Craddock gathered everyone in the drawing room, his voice firm. The decanter tested positive for belladonna. Someone poisoned it, likely targeting Graves. He held up the handkerchief, and Amelia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's mine, but I didn't—" she began, but Craddock cut her off, demanding explanations. Miss Marple, her voice gentle, suggested checking the manor's old safe, rumoured to be hidden in the study, possibly opened by the new key. The group moved to the study, where Craddock located a panel behind a bookshelf. The key fit perfectly, revealing a safe containing a bundle of letters and a small ledger. The letters, from Edward Thorne to Eleanor, spoke of a plan to sell the eastern fields, thwarted by her marriage to another. The ledger listed payments to a R.B., Colonel Blake, for services tied to the land deal. Blake's face reddened, but he stayed silent, his hand in his pocket. Miss Marple's mind raced, connecting the dots. Edward's betrayal, the poisoned decanter, the Colonel's greed. She caught Victor watching her, his eyes cold, and Amelia's nervous glance at Blake. Dr. Thorne's trembling hand suggested he knew more than he admitted, while Lady Evelyn's silence hinted at a burden carried too long. As night fell, Miss Marple walked the garden alone, the roses swaying under the moon. She paused by the fountain, where a faint glint caught her eye. A broken watch chain, monogrammed E.H., Eleanor Hargroves. It lay near the spot where Graves had died, as if dropped in haste. The garden's whispers grew sharp, urging her to see the final piece. In her room, Miss Marple opened her notebook, listing the day's finds. The decanter, the handkerchief, the key, the letters, the watch chain. The truth was close, the killer's motive rooted in a past of greed and broken promises. She locked her door, the manor's shadows pressing in, the final revelation just beyond her grasp. The garden's whispers roar, the truth a thorn ready to draw blood. One last secret waits, and the killer's mask is slipping, pulling us toward the final unraveling. Chapter 10. The Garden's Confession. The rose garden of Whispering Garden Manor glowed under a silver moon, its petals trembling as if eager to confess the secrets they'd guarded for decades. Miss Jane Marple stood in the drawing room, her knitting needles silent, her mind a tapestry of clues woven into a clear, chilling pattern. The manor's air was heavy with anticipation. The guests gathered for what they sensed was the final reckoning. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned their faces, each a thread in the deadly web she was about to unravel. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his expression stern but expectant. "Miss Marple has something to share," he announced, gesturing to her. The guests, Lady Evelyn Hargrove, Colonel Blake, Amelia Hargrove, Dr. Thorne and Victor Langston, sat rigid, their eyes locked on her. Lady Evelyn's hands clutched her locket, Colonel Blake's fingers hovered near his pocket. Amelia's bracelet gleamed with nervous twists. Dr. Thorne's glasses slipped down his nose, and Victor's gaze was cold, calculating. The garden's whispers seemed to seep through the windows, urging the truth to bloom. Miss Marple began, her voice calm but firm. "This manor holds a story of love, betrayal, and greed, rooted in the past but flowering in murder. It began with Eleanor Hargrove and Edward Thorne, lovers torn apart by a secret tied to the eastern fields." She held up the diary, its pages open to Eleanor's words. Edward planned to sell the fields, a fortune hidden in plain sight. But Eleanor's marriage to another thwarted him. He left, bitter, but not before hiding clues. A locket, a letter, a deed, to ensure the truth would one day surface. Lady Evelyn's breath hitched, her eyes wide. Miss Marple continued. "Mr. Graves, the butler, knew too much. He'd served Eleanor, kept her secrets, and recently uncovered the deed's hiding place. Someone feared his knowledge. She produced the belladonna vial, its label stark. This poison, found in the underground chamber, killed Graves, laced in his tea from the parlour's decanter." Dr. Thorne gasped, his hands shaking. Miss Marple's gaze softened but didn't waver. "Dr. Thorne, your father was Edward. You found his letters, didn't you? You knew the field's value and your family's claim, but you didn't kill. Your fingerprints on the vial were from handling it years ago, studying its contents as a young doctor." Thorne nodded, tears in his eyes. "I only wanted to understand my father's pain," he whispered. She turned to Colonel Blake, whose face reddened. "Colonel, your greed led you to the fields. The ledger's payments to R.B. were for your help in a shady land deal years ago, tied to Edward's plan. You found the ring in the garden, a relic of that deal, and kept it, hoping to cash in." Blake's hand froze in his pocket, his bluster gone. "I didn't kill anyone," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple's eyes shifted to Amelia, who shrank back. "Amelia, your earrings and handkerchief placed you in the garden. You searched for the deed, driven by dreams of wealth, but you're no murderer. Your fear came from knowing too much, overhearing plans you couldn't unhear." Amelia's eyes brimmed with tears, her nod barely perceptible. Finally, Miss Marple faced Victor Langston, whose calm facade cracked slightly. "Victor, you orchestrated this. As the family solicitor, you knew of the field's value and Eleanor's secrets. You found the deed's hiding place through old documents and feared Graves would expose you. You poisoned the decanter, knowing he'd drink from it. Your cufflink in the garden, your midnight digging. It was you, covering your tracks." She held up the tarnished key with E.T. initials. "This was your mistake, dropped when you hid the vial." Victor's face hardened, but before he could speak, Lady Evelyn stood, her voice trembling. It's true. Victor confessed to me last night, begging me to stay silent. He said it was to protect the family, but it was for his own gain. She clutched her locket, tears falling. Graves died because he was loyal to my mother, guarding her secrets. Craddock stepped forward, his voice sharp. Victor Langston, you're under arrest for the murder of Mr. Graves. As constables handcuffed him, Victor's eyes burned with defiance, but he said nothing. The room exhaled, the tension breaking like a storm passing. Amelia sobbed. Colonel Blake slumped in his chair, and Dr. Thorne buried his face in his hands. Lady Evelyn approached Miss Marple, her voice soft. Thank you, Jane. You've freed us from the past. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. The garden always speaks if you listen. She glanced out the window where the roses swayed, their whispers now a sigh of relief. The manor's secrets were laid bare, the killer unmasked, the truth blooming at last. As the guests dispersed, Craddock shook Miss Marple's hand. You've a gift, Miss Marple. St. Mary Mead's lucky to have you. She smiled, gathering her knitting. Just an old woman with a knack for patterns, she said, but her eyes twinkled with quiet triumph. The garden falls silent, its secrets finally told. The mystery is solved, but the roses will always whisper, hinting at stories yet to unfold. If you've enjoyed this tale, grab a cup of tea, hit that like and subscribe button, and join us for more mysteries. Your support means the world to us.